Hello, and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 117, where Garth had the opportunity to interview Brittany Avila from the University of Nevada, Reno, in Reno, Nevada. Now, before you hear the interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. Now, Brittany has a really interesting position at UNR. She is a teaching assistant professor half-time and a professional academic advisor for the other half-time position. And one of the things I realized after listening to her interview, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, is that she's student-centered, and that's a term that we might toss around pretty easily, and we say a lot, and I think most of our listeners would consider themselves student-centered. But when you're finished listening to this interview between Garth and Brittany, she's really student-centered, and I have to tell you, this may be the highest compliment that I can give to Brittany. She talked about how she's in year 3 after receiving her PhD. I would love to hear a conversation from what Bill McKeechee sounded like in year 3 after receiving his PhD, or Jane Hallinan sounded like year 3 after receiving her PhD, and how they talked about students and being student-centered because, and again, those are hypothetical conversations that we'll never overhear, but I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I kind of think that's what Brittany sounds like to me. Listen to this interview, and this is in her DNA. It's really fascinating, and I really think it's going to be the benefit of teachers of psychology everywhere. It was fun to hear her talk about the excitement of history of psychology, and we've actually been on a streak lately for our careful listeners of the Psych Sessions podcast. If you listen to the Doug Woody episode and even the Tony Puente episode before his, the last 3 guests on the podcast, and trust me, this was not by plan, are all passionate teachers of the history of psychology. It's almost like we should go back and label this a mini-series. That was not the plan, but it was great to hear Brittany talk about that course. I do appreciate that Brittany is a generalist. In fact, we might call her the generalist because she's got so many research interests that she talks about during the podcast. And by the way, research isn't even part of her job description, but of course she's interested in them. You can hear this kind of infectious enthusiasm throughout her interview with Garth, and not only for the types of research, but for the types of outlets. You know, she's got her own Career Journeys podcast, and I will give that URL in the show notes. She started a TikTok account. Why? Because her students encouraged her to. She's got a Twitter page. And she's actually doing, from what I could tell, a really nice job with work-life balance. She's got rules for herself. And that was really connected to her conversation with Garth about trying to help teach her students rules and work study and study habits for doing better schoolwork. And so I appreciated that. Brittany's a first-generation college student, and she talked about the influence of her parents and competition with her older sister, and growing up in California and having the actress bug from a young age. And Garth rightly pointed out that there's been many a conversation on prior Psych Sessions podcasts episodes where many folks have had either an interest in drama or been high school plays, or even a few have appeared in some plays along the way. These two have a really interesting conversation about STP and getting involved and avoiding becoming over-involved, and also about being strategic and being involved in STP and other organizations like that. They end on a note about accountability and kind of Brittany's secret tricks, if you will. I guess they're not so secret, about how to hold yourself accountable, although she's so productive. And I know she mentioned imposter syndrome a couple of times, and I'm going to be respectful enough to not tell someone, hey, you're not an imposter, you're doing the real deal. If someone feels that way, they get to feel how they feel. But Brittany's well on her way to being one of the huge contributors in our field, and we are all the beneficiaries of that. So please, folks, enjoy this podcast.
This Psych Sessions podcast is brought to you by Macmillan Learning. At Macmillan Learning Psychology, we know content matters, but only if that content truly reflects contemporary psychology and the way it's being taught today. That's why, unlike other publishers, we continue to invest in first editions, both to bring exciting new voices to the discipline and to bring the mastery of established authors to emerging courses. Take, for example, Kathleen Berger's latest, The Developing Person Through the Lifespan, a topical approach. It brings to the topically organized course the same qualities that have made Berger the world's best-selling author of human development textbooks, remarkable currency, a genuinely global perspective, and Berger's captivating narrative voice. Macmillan Learning Psychology, because content matters more when it serves the needs of today's students and instructors. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions to find out more. Welcome to Psych Sessions. I am here with Brittany Avila from the University of Nevada, Reno. Hey, Brittany, it is so good to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on.
Well, help me out because I know that it seemed to me at some point when I looked at your faculty webpage for the University of Nevada, Reno, it seemed to me that you have a few different things going on there in your role. Can you just tell me what you do there?
So primarily my two roles are teaching assistant professor, so professor non-tenure track, and then academic advising. So I'm supposed to split my time half and half between teaching and advising.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, I was surprised to find it too. Actually, when I was applying to all types of positions, honestly, tenure track, non-tenure track. And I found this one, and it so happened that we have family in Reno, and so it was attractive to apply to. And it had this weird half advising model, and I was a little nervous at first, but then I got to thinking that I like advising. It was one of the things I was going to miss going non-tenure track, to be able to advise students in a laboratory setting. So I got interested in it, and I started to research it a little bit more, and then I applied and I came here. And it was just a really cool model. It's nice to be able to impact students' lives outside of my own classroom. So I get to see a wide variety of students, even people that don't ever attend my classes. And it was exciting to be able to do that.
Okay, so what's your teaching load like then?
It's actually really small for a non-tenure track professor. I do 2 and 2.
Okay, so it's a 2 and 2, mm-hmm. and so if we're talking about like a work week, that's kind of half your time, right? It's a 50-50 split, okay? And then we know what kind of flexibility we have as instructors. We kind of work like many non-traditional hours if we so choose or whatever, but then the advising thing's got to have some traditional things going on, right?
Yeah, so I have flexibility as well. I can set my advising hours whenever I want to, but I tend to keep them pretty traditional. I usually do the same days each week, kind of same times, make it a little easier, but I can move them around at any time. And those are usually kind of the 9 to 5 hours that I keep. And then I do them not every day of the week either, so that I can have some time to devote to teaching.
Does this mean that these students that you're seeing, does this mean that because you're going to see like nursing students and business students and all kinds of different students, or no?
Yeah, no. So in our model, the advising that we do is just psychology students. So I only advise psychology students. Essentially, UNR became a Research One university recently, and a lot of times you see the advising split between faculty. And they didn't necessarily want to do that. And so they brought in, there's 3 of us in this same position, and we handle the entire advising load for psychology students. And then we also have like the College of Science that we're in advises our students when they're incoming as freshmen. So we only really see them sophomore, junior, senior year.
And how many do you like divide up the students among the three of you? Then like how many students are you advising at any given time?
Yeah, so we have quite a few majors like most psychology departments, and then we split them up between the three of us, and then we also usually take on 2 graduate students that help with some of our, psychology minors, or we have a neuroscience major that they help with that as well. So I personally am in charge of about 200 to 230 students typically at one given time, but it's also optional. So I'm not usually seeing all 200. I see a lot more of them during peak times, such as registration, right before and after registration. And then most of the time I'm seeing probably about 20 to 30 that are repeat advising that come in pretty regularly for all types of questions.
Okay, so I have no doubt that when it's peak season, that it's crazy.
Yes.
And you're supposed to be teaching at the same time, which is crazy.
Yes.
But that's not the part I want to talk about yet. What is it like when it's kind of not busy? And what do you fill your time with in your advising role? Or is it kind of an expected kind of ebb and flow? And when it's busy, you work. And when it's not busy, you don't do as many of those tasks?
Sort of. It definitely slows down, and then I have a little bit more time to devote to teaching. Or we also try to do workshops. I actually just launched my study habits workshop that I have for students. We have a grad school workshop, things that are common questions for students. So sometimes I'll work on that. I've noticed now that I'm in my 3rd year here, and I've started to build relationships with students. So I'm having a lot less non-busy times. A lot of the times my students are coming in repeat. They're asking about grad school applications. They're asking about careers in psychology. And so there's not as much of a downtime anymore. And I've also noticed with COVID in particular, my busy time is much more extended than it used to be. It used to be like 1 month each semester. And now students are coming in a little bit more frequently.
Yeah. Well, and I think probably some listeners are out there and like, why are we talking so much about advising other than that we really like Brittany? But I'm going to tell you that with the first kind of full-time job I had at Highline College there was an advising component to it. And I didn't actually, in my role, I didn't have to, but the tenured colleagues, because mine was a 1-year contract, and I was there for I think 8 years. But my tenured colleagues were passionate about advising and working with students in this way, which I don't think is typical at most places where faculty are taking on that as a part. Well, I don't know. Maybe I need to think about that. But anyway, I really started to enjoy getting into that part of students' lives. And so I guess maybe what is it like to get to know students as a faculty member versus as an advisor? Is it different?
A little. Yeah, it's really nice. What I like about advising that's different from teaching is I really get to see students over a longer period. So I get to watch them over 2 years. I get to know them a little bit more personally. I know what their goals are. I know what sometimes their family situations are. I know what their home life is like a little bit more, what their careers or jobs are like. And so I get to help them at a different level, and I get to help them figure out more about their lives and less about kind of class content. And so it's actually transferred into my teaching completely, where now I actually try to figure out some of this stuff about my students to be able to give better feedback and better ideas of how they can improve their work, because seeing them more holistically as a whole person just gives you so much more information to work with and to help them succeed. And it's a lot of fun to be able to watch them grow I get to see when they're up for graduation. I get to kind of congratulate them. And that part I feel like gets a little bit missing when you're teaching and your students kind of leave your class and then you never see them again.
Yeah, for sure. What typical courses do you teach during the year?
I teach introductory psychology, history of psychology, and cognitive psychology. I've been kind of teaching all three at the same time, but what I usually do is teach two of those three at one time and then just kind of move them around.
Okay, so kind of different levels. You are seeing freshmen who you won't see as their advisor, and then later on, you will have some of those students in your courses as well.
Yeah, and I've seen every semester I get an increased enrollment of my advisees into my classes, so I start to recognize names before they're even enrolled, or vice versa. Sometimes I have students that are in my classes that end up coming to see me for advising, because even though we split our students among the three of us, they also have choice at any point in time, so they can choose to see other advisors too. So I tend to kind of get the same cohort that go through my two classes, my two upper division classes, and advising.
Do you think, from what you know as an advisor, do you think that advising should be mandatory at some point? Or maybe that's too black and white. Maybe it's like, are students getting good advising, or are they able to navigate the system if they're not coming in to talk to an advisor? Are they doing okay, or do they need it?
That's a really good question, and I have a lot of opinions on that now.
Yeah, let's go.
It depends, because every university, what I've come to learn from this one being unique is that every university has a different advising structure. So our advising structure is really robust. We have different advisors at every level. We have university advisors, financial aid advisors, college of science advisors, department advisors. And so we really try to get students at each step. But because it's not mandatory, there are still students that I feel like fall through the cracks. Even students that I have that come to me regularly have trouble navigating the system. When I think about it, it took me 3 months to really learn the system well enough to be able to advise. Students don't have 3 months to learn how to figure it out, right? I mean, technically they have 4 years, but they're not devoting all day, every day to that. And so it's a difficult system to navigate sometimes. I have students that don't know when their registration date is. I have students that don't know they have to complete 120 credits to graduate. And so I think that it's a complicated system. There's a lot of different requirements. There's different requirements for different options, and it can be difficult to navigate. And I think if they're not coming, it might be a little bit more difficult. And I personally think that we should have it mandatory at some regard. When I was getting my PhD, they had mandatory advising. So in order to register for courses, you had to meet with your advisor prior to, and I really liked that model.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether mandatory or not should be. I guess you could kind of argue for both sides, but it would help a lot of students who might otherwise fall through the cracks, or who might be naive. I mean, the student who doesn't understand how many credits it's going to take for them to graduate, or the student who doesn't understand registration dates. It's hard to know whether that is because they weren't paying attention, or because the college was not communicating it well, or the university wasn't communicating it well, or if they've just never had people around them who told them, what the game was and how to play it. So I'm sure that all those things are in play, and for one student or another. And it seems to me like mandatory advising would remove some of that. So maybe from an equity perspective, it could be helpful. Yeah, go ahead.
I do think it depends on the quality of advising. So I do remember being in college, and I saw some pretty bad advisors, and it ended up making me not want to go anymore. And I was first generation, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I ended up taking an extra year because I took all of my general ed before ever diving into a major. And it's one of the reasons I became an advisor, because sometimes you just don't know when I think a lot of times too, students, we get this information, but we get it at orientations where we're overloaded. We're learning all day about a ton of different requirements, a ton of different ideas, a ton of different things. We're excited, we're nervous, we have all the emotions going on. It's not necessarily the greatest format to introduce all of those things to students. And then if they go through advising and they have advisors that aren't great or are not properly trained for everything, it can cause them to not trust that system as much. And so I think if the mandatory advising is in there, there also needs to be proper training to make sure that the advisors are doing it properly.
Yeah, well, and I really feel for advisors, particularly like where I'm at community college. They have to know so much. And one of the critiques at, when they're advising across, the natural sciences and the social sciences and business and all those kinds of things, they can't know it all. And so it becomes a real challenge for them. At least in your current situation, there has to be some kind of repetition for psych majors, right? Some general things, or I don't know, it's not norms, but it's like some probability that the same questions are going to come up over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you said that you wanted to be an advisor. Did you know that before you took this job?
I knew it before I took the job. I didn't necessarily know it before I saw the job ad. I think I knew that I wanted to advise in some capacity. I knew that it was a possibility to be part of the job description somewhere because, again, my PhD university had it as mandatory for all faculty. And I knew it was there. I loved advising students in the research lab. I loved talking to students about everything and advising in more of informal. So I knew I liked it. I didn't know necessarily that I wanted it to be half of my role in my position. And then I saw this and I kind of thought back to my own experience, and I thought about the advising that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do on a non-tenure track position at other places. And then it just started to click that it seemed like a good fit. And so it was really kind of seeing the job ad and doing the research in my head about whether I wanted to do it or not kind of sold me on it.
Yeah. I was first gen too, but I never went and saw an advisor. And that really, that hurt me. It wasn't in terms of taking more schooling, but I just felt like I was slow to everything. And I think it's actually lingered into career, especially early career, just lingered for me.
Absolutely.
Right. And so good advising can make all the difference. And I have no doubt that that you connect with your students and that you are a really really helpful presence in their lives. Now let's talk about the teaching side of things, because I have this burning question, which is, tell me why history of psychology is
the best
interesting.
class ever.
I knew you were going to say. I think we've had this conversation. Okay, go ahead. Talk to me.
I love history of psych. I keep toying with the idea of writing a book because the history of psych textbooks are not fantastic. But
okay, so hold on. I think listeners, if they don't teach history of psych, they have some idea of what it is. Mm-hmm. So tell us why we're wrong.
So there is a lot of resistance. Every time I talk about that I teach history of psych, I do get why do you teach that class? So I know that there's some stigma around it, like why is it necessary? Why do we need it? But I really like it for multiple reasons. One, I've just always loved history and philosophy and ideas. It was something that I was drawn to in just college and wanting to understand. So I personally like learning history. But more than that, I think that history of psychology is so important because if we don't know where our science has been, and we don't know that it's a young science, and that we don't know our mistakes, and we don't know our successes, how do we move on into the future? How do we not just repeat the same mistakes? But beyond that, the zeitgeist of the times is something that you hear in every history of psych textbook and class. but really what's going on in the world impacts the discipline. And that is something to really grapple with. And it's so much fun to watch students figure out, you'll teach them about phrenology, and students will be like, oh, how did people ever think that phrenology was accurate? Like, why did people go with that? Why was that even a thing? It sounds so stupid. And then you get to say, okay, well, it didn't sound stupid at the time. So what do you think that's some of our main theories right now that we're grappling with right now that we think are amazing? Which ones of those do you think, 100 years from now, people are going to be laughing at us about? And then it's so fun to watch students be like, really, is something wrong right now? And so it really teaches students to evaluate critically, what are these theories that they're learning? What are these ideas that they're learning? And instead of passively consuming them and thinking they're all correct, you get to watch undergraduate students really start to grapple with this idea that they need to challenge these ideas sometimes, or that they're not exactly right. And also watch them understand how the spirit of the times, how what's going on in the world around us influences what we're studying. So, when we had that cognitive revolution, all of a sudden what you get funding for is very different. So we have kind of neuroscience coming in favor. When I was in college, anything with an fMRI would get you grant funding. That was something that professors would always say when I was in college. So what is happening right now, what's in vogue, influences what we're studying and what we're learning specifically, or what we're not able to study because we can't get funding for it, or it's not popular enough for people to publish it. And so you get to really show them the other side of psychology that's not just the theories and ideas. You really get to introduce the actual field, what it'll be like if they continue on to graduate school, what some of those problems are, what the replication crisis is, what's happening even today in our field. And I think that's what's most misunderstood, is that it's not just focusing on the history of the discipline, it's really bringing all of that history to talk about what's happening today and then how they can change that in the future.
That's really helpful. And by the way, I know that people who teach history of psych, and you know who you are, and I've had conversations with many of you about this. One thing that is always just crazy to me is that you're all extremely passionate about it. And I know that it's like from people who are early career to people who are late career or retired, once they get that history of psych bug, I mean, they think it's just the best thing in the world. And so your explanation is really, really helpful, because I think maybe the impression, I never took a history of psych course. I have a little section in my intro psych books that I skip called History of Psychology, I think, yeah. but it's like, it's not what you're talking about.
No.
It's not those kind of interesting, that arc of what is psychology, what is it meant, what does it mean, what does that mean for the future and for your future? I'd take that class that you were just talking about.
Well, you get the fun little facts, like how, the T-test was invented to determine which beer was better. You get, students love those types of things, but they also get to understand, arguments in psychology. They don't realize that people have arguments in publications back and forth, that people are kind of, behaviorism versus cognitive psychology was such a big argument at the time. And they don't really learn that. They kind of learn about behaviors and they learn about cognitive. They learn about these all kind of separately. Like, in introductory psychology, we talk about them all as if they're kind of separate entities. And in history of psych, we get to blend them all together. Let's talk about all of these together. How did they interact? What, were they happening at the same time or at a different time? How does it color what we study and what we examine and all of that?
Yeah. Help me, tell me if I'm on the right track. So when I was I'm going to name drop, when I was talking to Albert Bandura about his early studies, about television and violence on television, and he went in front of Congress to talk about violence in television, and there was a huge backlash against him, and Stanford stood behind him and said, "No, we're going to listen to the science." Like, how this all plays out, would this be something that History of Psych would talk about?
Absolutely. Things I love to bring in exactly that type of thing. I was listening to the episode with Elizabeth Loftus recently too, and even something as early, or not as early, but as current as Elizabeth Loftus in the Harvey Weinstein case, right? That's something we could talk about in History of Psych, because you have all these different times where psychology is trying to take a stand on something. These social justice issues are things that psychology has kind of stood up for, or how we use psychology to make an impact policy-wise, things like that. Anything that's related to psychology as a field is pretty much what I'm getting at in my History of Psych class, is helping students understand what psychology really is at its fundamental core, and where it stands, and where we are as a very young discipline, and how they get to have agency in how we shape it for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about just what we've seen in culture in the last couple of years. This will have implications. So when we're talking about racism in the United States, or other topics that have, the political divide, these are all things that are going to shape it. Now, so help me understand, because History of Psychology, I like bad titles really irk me. And so, like, I don't feel like it's a fair title to what we're talking about. Have you ever thought about, like, what would be a better name? And maybe you disagree with me, which is fine. But what's a better or more true name for this course other than History of Psych?
I haven't actually thought of that. I've never hated the term. I think probably because I still like the class. Yep. And we definitely still talk about history. We guide it based off of the events of history, and then we just bring in kind of present and future each time we talk about it. Yep. But we do, at my university, we actually have this course. It's a really long title, so it's not necessarily the best, but it's Philosophical Criticisms of Psychological Research. And in that class, they do a lot of the same things. They talk about psychology as a science. They talk about the ethics of science, the culture, history, all influencing science. And I think that's similar, but they don't necessarily go into in depth the history of psychology itself. They might talk a little bit more about philosophy and science, which is part of its history, but less on, Wundt as the founder of psychology and different labs and things like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, you can keep the name, okay? I know it seems to work for you. And you know what? It does make sense. I mean, history does not necessarily need to just look back. I think it does have implications for looking at our present world and looking forward. So that's fair. Now, did you take a History of Psych course? Did we cover that yet? I don't think I heard you mention it.
No, I took two. I took a History of Psychology course in my undergrad. I honestly don't remember too much. I know I liked the course. And then I took one in my graduate career as well. And that one really influenced the fact that I wanted to teach it.
Interesting. And was that part of did you come out of an experimental program, or what do you?
Yes, I have kind of a varied past, because I studied different things at each turn. But I got my master's in social psychology, and then I got my PhD in cognitive developmental psychology.
Okay. All right. And we'll, I want to figure out where you went to school and how that all worked out. Let me think. I'm making notes to myself. So you teach like these very different classes: intro psych, history, cog. You are an advisor. You are an instructor. I've seen you give a talk. You're very good at that. You have a podcast. You want to write a textbook. I'm sure that you've published at some point or another. What do you like to do, or is it all the things?
I love to do everything, and it's the bane of my existence, to be honest. I actually just this morning sketched out like a mind map of what I want to do and what my career can kind of look like. This is one of the issues I think early career faculty have, at least I do, of narrowing down. And I've always had this problem. That's why, in undergrad, I studied clinical psychology. In graduate, I studied social, and then I moved to developmental. And I think it's just because I want to know everything and I want to kind of do everything. And it used to overwhelm me. And I was like, I can't do all of this. I have to narrow down. I have to have one kind of program of study. I have to have one thing. And then I think I just learned that it's 2021 and I don't have to necessarily do that. So I'm trying to keep it in a few realms. And so that a lot of my stuff will be similar, but I kind of just do stuff as it comes about. I do what sparks joy, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Is that Marie Kondo? Is that who that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it though. I'm totally with you. So how do you think about creativity?
Yes, actually I studied creativity for my dissertation, and I'm trying to bring,
of course.
So I'm trying to bring my creativity research back. I obviously don't have research as a part of my job title, but they don't mind if I do it. So I'm kind of toying with this idea. I've been trying to develop something about how we can teach creativity to students, or how we can build programs that kind of flex the creativity muscle. Something I learned is creativity is often misunderstood, and it's kind of like intelligence, where many people think it's fixed and they think it's only related to kind of the big creativity like art, music, movies. And people don't necessarily understand that it's a muscle, it's a skill that you can practice and hone over time. And so I'm trying to figure out how to basically help students learn how to be more creative and help people learn how to be more creative. So I do think about creativity quite often.
Okay, so you did you say you did a dissertation on creativity? That's what your topic was? Okay, so so let's talk about it a little bit. Help us be creative. Do you remember, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I have my own armchair theories about creativity, and I've done some reading about it. And I would say that it's a passion of mine to follow my creative kind of impulses. But what do we know about creativity? And then what don't we know? But what have you, what kind of guides you as you think about it?
So we actually know quite a bit about creativity. There's a few scholars that have really been focusing on it for a long time. And so we know certain things of what can help with creativity. We know a lot more right now. The business world is on fire with creativity because they're linking it to innovation. But the biggest thing I think that comes out of that research is just that it's not necessarily all that big stuff. So I think I got into creativity because I didn't consider myself creative. And so I wanted to understand, how do these people do this? How do they write novels? How do they make these big artwork? And then when I dived into it, I realized that creativity is not just that. It's actually little things. It's solving problems. It's thinking of something in a new way. It's asking new questions, which is exactly what we do in academia and in teaching. And so it can be something as small as creating a new recipe with all the stuff you have in your kitchen when you don't have a full meal to make. And that's kind of the most fascinating part to me, is that we can have creativity in everything that we do, and we need creativity pretty much in everything that we do, but it's easier to achieve than I think people think it is a lot of times. So the research shows the best ways to increase creativity are things that most people do anyways: going out for a walk in nature, so hiking or walking around. There's a story that Albert Einstein was blocked on understanding something, and he went for a walk, found a cow, and was like, all of a sudden had this epiphany and had a big breakthrough. So walking in nature, writing things down, reading as much as you can on a topic, and then walking away. So all very achievable things.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with the getting out in nature, walking around, I feel like some of my best ideas come, and they would never come if I wasn't doing those things. So yeah, so just putting yourself under conditions where kind of creative ideas spark. Yeah, so what you talked about all these different things you do. I don't know if you said it this way, but I think when you were thinking about like what might your career look like or your aspirations, what is like what are you passionate about right now? Because as I listed all those things, and then you listed some other things like a social psych background, a development background. Where are you going to put your efforts in the next, let's say, phase of your career?
So I think I've noticed that my number one priority is to students. And there's a little bit of a gap. That the research on teaching and learning has been amazing and it's been prolific of recent, but there's a little bit of a gap on getting that information to students. And so I'm working on that right now. So I'm currently writing a book, hopefully, and putting together kind of a program of teaching students better study strategies. But beyond study strategies, I've been kind of diving into social psych research on how to build habits, because studying is basically just habits that we've built up. But one problem is that our education system, at least here in the US, is not necessarily designed for the type of learning that we really want students to have in higher education. And so instead they learn, how to get grades rather than how to actually learn the material. And so their habits are not necessarily conducive to their new goals being in higher education. And so I'm looking into blending how to build and break habits to actually use these study strategies. I noticed when I talk to students about the study strategies and I show them, the Stephen Chu videos, they get really excited and they say, this is amazing. But then when I really sat down and talked with them, they're like, yeah, I'm never going to implement this because I don't know how. It's overwhelming. I can't do it. So I think kind of bridging research on how to create habits and start really small can help them actually start to implement these strategies. And then I'm working on trying to help them figure out like planning and time management and how to figure out how to study and when to study and things like that. Because especially with COVID, it's thrown them for a loop. They have to all of a sudden plan and do time management completely different. So I'm working on communicating that to students. I'm working on understanding, again, how to teach creativity. I'm thinking that creativity might be linked a little bit to I'm blanking on the word right now, critical thinking that we're all so excited to have students do, but we don't quite yet know exactly how we're teaching critical thinking. I think creativity can lend to that idea.
So,
and yeah.
Sorry, let me bump back to students or the study skills. So you said that one of the things that you are realizing is that a passion of yours is just with students, and you mentioned earlier that in the podcast that you were kind of developing a study habits workshop. And now I'm learning that, well, it's because you think that habits, these like small habits, are really important. I've read some of these recent books that have come out, kind of popular books about habits. They really rely on psychology quite a lot. Yes. And then some also very just like sensible, I don't know, things that are not necessarily, I'm sure somebody studied them in psychology, but they're sensible. They're like, hey, when you need to form a new habit, pair it with another habit that you're doing every day.
Exactly.
Yeah. So these little hacks, right? Are these, and by the way, I agree with you that this doesn't exist, as far as what I've seen. So is that kind of the level that or is it more scholarly than that?
No, it's basically that. Yeah. So I've been reading a lot of those same books. I have been obviously looking at more of the scholarly work behind some of those books as well. But because I want to target this towards students and I want them to understand it, I'm trying to make it less scholarly as well, because not every student needs to hear that. They're not going to read a long book. We all know that students don't like to read a lot right now. So essentially it's breaking it down to that. How do you, start small? How do you pair it with another habit? The biggest thing is that research looks at rewards. And with studying, rewards are they're separated from the behavior itself. They don't come until at the very least a day later when you get the exam score, right? At most a month, a year when they graduate, they're not getting that reward. And we definitely know from psychology that the reward and the behavior need to be paired pretty close in proximity. So some of that research talks about how to just do internal rewards, like how to kind of scream excitement. When we get a certain award or a grant, we get really excited and we have that like internal happy dance. And so just teaching students something as easy as when you study for 10 minutes on Tuesday afternoon, you do a little happy dance. You kind of have that internal reward. And then that gives you a sense, studying can feel really overwhelming. It can feel really anxiety provoking because you're worried about all of that other stuff, getting the good grade, getting the good job. And when the reward's not in close proximity, it doesn't seem worth it. And so trying to find ways for students to reward themselves internally, immediately, for doing something as small as answering one practice question, then they can start to feel satisfaction and maybe some positive emotions related to studying so that they might want to do it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I love the idea, and if you can create something that students would that would help students, kind of on those small things, and then moving to larger things, and take that what we know and what we're learning, and make it accessible, but also attractive to students, I think that it would be a huge win. So, so where else are you thinking about putting your time and energies? Obviously into students. And by the way, it's pretty cool that you have this advising role, which allows you to do some double dipping into doing these workshops and putting this stuff together, but maybe triple dipping, also getting into the research, and then also working on like projects personally that you want to be doing, like writing.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's cool. But what else are you? Because I noticed you're also on social media. You've got a great Twitter presence. I don't know where else you are on social media, but where else are you wanting to spend your time?
I actually started TikTok at the advice of my students, and so I'm trying to work on getting a good TikTok series down. I've not been doing very well at it now, so I have a new idea to completely revamp that. But trying to get those study habits ideas, career advice, all those things that I do in other areas with my podcast and with advising. I see students come through all the time. They all have similar questions. You should know, as a first generation student, there's a lot of things that some students just don't know. And so I'm really just working on trying to bridge the gap to, like you said, make it attractive to students. And so a few of my students suggested TikTok, and so I'm trying to implement that. Twitter, I use a little bit more professionally. That is my number one way to network. And I try to tell students to network on social media too, because it's just been amazing for me personally. So really, I'm just trying to kind of get the message out there as much as I can. So I've also very recently, so it's still brand new, kind of started a blog on my website too that talks about all of these different things to try to just get it out there and figure out in what way can I make this attractive to students where they'll actually consume it. So I'm still working on figuring out exactly how to do that.
So is your blog and your podcast, are those, not that obviously faculty couldn't benefit from them, but are they really created for students in the end?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the podcast especially. I developed that podcast mainly because students, and myself included, I had no idea anything about careers. And honestly, until I actually got into my career, there's a lot of things I didn't know that I'm still learning. And students just come in and they're told all their lives, you get a bachelor's degree and then you get a job, and they don't understand anything else. And they don't understand where to go, especially in psychology when there's so many different jobs you can have. They are confused and they don't know. And when I try to give the same advice, you kind of see their eyes glaze over. They're just like, oh, okay, sure. And then from psychology, we know that stories tend to work better for understanding things than just prescribing advice. And so I started that because I wanted them to hear from people. I wanted them to know that when I say that certain life decisions, like where you want to live, if you want children, if you want to make a certain amount of money, if you want to live in a certain neighborhood, those matter to what career you choose. I feel like they almost didn't believe me. So I was like, well, let's have you listen to some people so that you can hear, that somebody ended up in a career field because, their mom moved to a different town. Or like me, I ended up in development because the person that I was supposed to work with for my PhD moved to a new university and they put me with the only other person that could accept a student. And that's how I ended up in developmental psychology and ended up really, really liking it. And so sometimes accidents can help shape your career. And I just wanted them to hear it directly from other people.
So I feel like as I'm looking down the list of all these things that you do, I had this misconception, or maybe I just didn't understand that it's all very student centered.
All student centered. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's just really interesting to let settle in. Now, because you have so many irons in the fire, like the pie chart of time management in your life, how do you do that?
That's why I'm kind of trying to teach time management, because I actually don't work nights and weekends either. I have a very strict policy that my husband keeps me very accountable for, because we have two small kids. We have a 4 and a 2-year-old. Mm-hmm. And when I'm home, I want to devote all that time to them. And so I actually learned in graduate school, I set a rule that when I went home for the day, I was home for the day and I would watch TV. So I felt like I was the only graduate student that was doing nothing at night. And I was probably a little less productive because of it, but I need that type of work-life balance. And so I basically just carve out my time as well as I can to focus on different things. I am trying to limit the number of irons I have in the fire. So I'm trying to focus in on a few of those things and maybe do those things really well, as opposed to trying to do everything. But I think the reason I have so many irons in the fire is because I'm still early career and I'm still trying to figure out and navigate exactly what I want to focus on. But I have narrowed down to, I want to try to be a conduit to students. I want to help them navigate this process, understand this process, because it took me a really long time. I think you mentioned in the very beginning that even as early career, I think we're still figuring out some of this stuff as first generation students. And I want to help them bridge that gap maybe a little earlier on.
Yeah. I know that I could just keep talking to you about kind of the present, because I think I share a lot of your passion for these things. Although what you have is well beyond, like, what's going on inside of you for students is beyond what's going on inside of me, which is really cool because I think we all have these different roles to play. Not that I don't care about students, obviously, but I do want to I want to figure out where this started for you. So, what patterns? So you're obviously highly efficient. You have these great boundaries. You're passionate about what you're doing. Has this always been the case, these things?
You make it sound a lot more concrete and easy than I think it fits in my head. No, I definitely have struggled with all of these things. I think it's a manifestation of the insecurity or the inability I had when I was maybe younger to manage my time or set firm boundaries or figure out what I wanted to do, that I just work extra hard at those things because I felt like I was lacking. It's the reason I went into creativity research too. I felt I was lacking in creativity. So all these areas I felt where I wasn't quite good enough, or I had that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I dive deep and I try to figure it out. And then now I'm realizing that at this stage, I've learned a thing or two, and I can try to help other students who feel that same way, again, maybe intercept it earlier than how long it took me to figure these things out.
So one of the questions that Eric asks that I never ask, but I think it's going to fast track us here. Not because I don't like the question, but for you, now you are first gen. So, and where did you grow up?
Fresno, California.
Oh, we've talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Because I did a stint in Fresno, not at prison, but graduate school.
Yeah.
But in Fresno, your folks, they didn't, go to college. So at that
Mm-hmm.
point, was it important to them that you went to college?
A little bit. I don't think I felt the same pressure that most other students feel. I think they were encouraging of going to college, but again, they didn't really have that background and they were successful. So I don't know that they really thought it was 100% needed. But I wanted to, like, my only goal when I was younger was to sit on a lawn studying at a university. Like, that was what I wanted. That was my career goal. Essentially, I wanted to be at college studying because, again, kind of this is why I went into history of psychology. I just loved the idea of learning. That's why I'm now kind of a teacher and I focus on teaching and learning. I really loved learning. And so I knew that I wanted to go to college.
Did
And
somebody model that for you?
well, I did have an older sister. So she went to school about 2 years before I did. And she was great at school. She was a double major. She was, summa cum laude, all that stuff. And so I had a little bit of a competitive streak where I wanted more chords at the end of my graduation than her. So I did have a little bit of a model, but
And what
no,
about
not really.
What about parents? Were your parents really interested in learning, even in like non-academic ways?
No.
Okay.
Actually, I remember with my dad, quite the opposite. I still remember this. I don't know how old I was, but I had to be less than third grade. I remember asking the difference between our and R, like ARE and OUR, and he couldn't tell me. I don't think it's that he didn't know, obviously, but like he didn't know how to articulate it. And so I was kind of coming from that where, they were self-made and they were successful, but they didn't necessarily think about learning at higher levels at any time.
Right. What did your folks do?
My dad works for UPS. He's worked there since before I was born, and he's about to retire in May. And my mother owns her own travel agency, which was great. Now it's taken a little bit of a hit.
Oh, that's interesting. I think we could probably dive into like the kinds of skills that they developed that you probably saw that maybe were poured into you. But we maybe don't have time. So then you decide to go do a bachelor degree in psychology straight away?
No, I changed my major a ton. I think I was undecided for probably at least the first year, if not year and a half.
Of course you did. You couldn't narrow down the things you were
I
interested in,
could,
right?
honestly, I don't think I still have narrowed down what I'm interested in, but I kept flip flopping. I wanted to do English. I wanted to do criminal justice. I wanted to do psychology. I wanted to do everything. But at the time when I had to actually sit down and finally decide, I think psychology felt like the more practical choice of all of them. With English, I was like, what am I going to do with a degree in English if I'm not a successful writer or editor? And so psychology seemed kind of the more practical of all of the things I was most interested in. And it kind of combined all of the other ones. I could still write, I could still investigate, I could still teach. And so I kind of just gravitated towards psychology.
I what kinds of experiences did you have growing up that allowed you to this is totally out of left field, but it just occurred to me. What kind of experiences did you have that allowed you to feel? Now I know you felt like so many people do that you had this imposter syndrome, but you must have had experiences that helped you build confidence in not only in yourself but in your abilities. So even if you didn't believe it, you must have had some experiences like from in high school. Were you doing like drama at that time, or were you
Yes.
yeah, were you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to be an actress my whole life. So I was in drama from elementary school up until college. I used to like write plays. So essentially my career goals when I was younger was I wanted to be either an actress, a teacher, a writer, or a director. And I learned that as a teacher, I can do all four. But yeah, I was in drama in high school. I was into all of that.
Yeah. As you were giving your last answer, I just started like thinking about you and all of these things. And I'm like, there's got to be something there. So nailed it. I'm just going to say that for the audience. I nailed it.
Well, and ironically, I didn't go into acting because I was scared of rejection. And so it's always my laughing joke that I ended up in academia where rejection is just as prevalent.
Oh my gosh. Totally. Wow. By the way, as we just kind of think about acting and drama, first of all, it's interesting to me how many teachers, and maybe I don't know if it's representative of kind of the general population of people who, have that background, but so many people we interview have that background, I'd say, if we get to it. So I think that does help us in the classroom, but I'm also just going to pay you a compliment, which is, I think you and I first met at Tip Northwest. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you give a talk, you connect with your audience in an unbelievable way. And so, it's remarkable. So there's a skill either innate, but, or developed over time, but there's something in there that you really do just connect with audience. And for some of us, I just think that's harder, especially in higher education in higher ed, where many of us are not trained teachers. And so I think these other things, the other backgrounds really do come into play sometimes. Do you think about your acting kind of aspirations and background as it relates to teaching sometimes?
Yeah, I definitely think in terms of performance, when you're on that stage, I think for me, it's basically because I'm more nervous on one-on-one. So if I'm talking to somebody one-on-one, if I'm teaching somebody one-on-one, I'm way more nervous. When I have a crowd of people, so like when I was younger, I was in dance and I had so much of a harder time during practice when like they would invite parents in and there was only like 5 of them, I couldn't perform. But when I got on a stage and it was like 500 people, all of a sudden it was easy. And so I think about that a lot in terms of how to design my lectures in that way. Or right now I'm using it a lot how can I use performance to design like my TikTok videos, or eventually I'm hoping to do a series of videos to produce. How, can I tap into that acting to engage people and to bring them in so that they're interested in it? So I think about it quite often, maybe not concretely. I probably don't necessarily actively say, oh, this is acting, but it definitely helps.
Yeah, totally. So where did you do your BA
at? Fresno State.
Oh, locally. Cool. Yeah. All right. Fresno State. And then your master's degree?
I did at Long Beach State. So I moved to Southern California.
Long Beach State. And what was the consideration for moving there or to doing it there?
I always wanted to live in Southern California. It's probably my acting roots. I basically applied to Fresno State and Long Beach State and got into both. And I went and visited Long Beach and it was beautiful. It was a great campus. My advisor was right on track with exactly like my personality. We fit well together. And I wanted to kind of branch out and try something new and take a risk.
Yeah. Did you go for any auditions while you were down there?
No, I probably should have. I was so focused on what I was doing. I think I Googled them a few times. I ended up being an extra on Dexter randomly because they were filming on my campus and I was running in the shot. And then they were like, do you just want to be an extra? So I did do that. You can see me in one of the episodes, actually.
What? Yeah. But you didn't get murdered or anything, so that's good.
No, I just walked like by him. And then they filmed like Criminal Minds. They would film right in my backyard. So they actually put the trailers in the parking lot right below my balcony. So I thought about it a few times, but I think I was still a little too afraid to jump into that. And I was kind of gung-ho on what I was doing.
When you were doing your master's in social psych there, were you thinking, okay, I'm going to do this master's in social and then I'm going to go, the next step is going to be the PhD somewhere?
Yeah, I knew I still wanted the PhD. The reason I did the master's first is because I had focused on clinical psychology in undergraduate as much as you can focus.
Yeah.
And I knew that wasn't quite right for me. So I didn't know if I wanted to go on into clinical psychology or if I wanted to focus on something else. And social psych was really calling my name. So I did the master's so that I could try it out. and see what I wanted. And then I applied to PhD social psych programs. And then again, I got accepted to the University of Mississippi, and I was going to work with a professor, and she ended up moving right before I went. And the department was so amazing. They were like, we have this brand new professor. She wasn't going to take graduate students, but she can take you on. She's in developmental, but she'll let you focus on whatever research. We can try to figure out where else you can fit. They were so accommodating. I just knew I had to go. And then it turns out I really liked development because I could focus on learning.
Yeah. So Mississippi.
Yeah.
And then what do you do after that? Is it a postdoc? Do you go for a teaching job? What do you do?
I came straight here. So I did, yeah. So I just graduated about 3 years ago. It feels like forever, but it's only been about 3 years. And this was the first job I got afterwards.
Wow. What was the job market like a few years ago? Was it like, what was your experience like?
I actually had a pretty good experience. I think I'm not of the norm, but I think that's also because I was open to non-tenure track jobs. I did my first interview at the University of Arizona, and that was a fantastic experience. And I didn't end up getting that job, which they were right, because I wasn't going to finish my dissertation quite in time, and I wasn't quite ready. And then this was kind of my second interview, and I really liked it here. I did have a chance to interview at another university to actually do a non-tenure track or a tenure track job, but I got this offer before I could do that interview. And I knew that, the academic market's so precarious, I had to go with what was in front of me. And since I actually really enjoyed this one, it made my choice a little easy.
Well, yeah, and you said there's like some personal things that worked for you. You're close to Fresno-ish. You had family in Reno, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the job worked for you. I suspect that as you've been there longer, that the job has, as you kind of settled in, I imagine you really like what you're doing.
I do. Yeah. It's the one thing, if I ever did leave, I was like, how am I going to find this exact kind of structure anywhere else? I don't know anywhere else that does this kind of 50-50 teaching advising role, and I like it.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's really neat. So, how are you, you said that you're networking through Twitter. You've obviously come up to Seattle for Tip Northwest, twice?
Yeah, and then almost right. I was gonna go again.
Yeah. And then what else are you doing? Are you involved with STP, or what are you up to?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, I was trying. Well, even now, I'm eagerly trying to be more involved on committees and things like that, but I haven't quite had success yet. So I keep applying and trying to get into more areas. I do, I'm on one committee within STP right now. And I'm trying to do pretty much as possible. I'm one of those weird people that really likes service, and I like being on these things and doing that. And so I've had to limit, though, with the pandemic and parenting and all of these things. There's been a few things recently that I really wanted to apply for that I just did not have the available time to give it what it deserved.
Yeah, I feel the same way right now. As somebody who I think I'm with you, where we do a lot, and we always want to do more, and we have trouble saying no, and we're like just a constant yes. Tell me when I'm wrong. But I have seen this pandemic, for all the terrible things that have happened. It's been a gift in that it's been an invitation to slow down, because that treadmill has just sped up, and it just keeps going faster and can sometimes just feel very out of control for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've definitely felt that recently, where there's been a few times where I'm just like, I don't know that I want to be in this rat race anymore. It's hard to keep up, but
it is. Yeah. I'm still dealing with that. Somebody told me recently, well, Garth, you're firmly in mid-career. And I was like, I'm in mid, like, I'm not young anymore. What's going on?
Yeah.
But which was hard to hear. Now I can't even remember what I was going to say because I'm so traumatized by that. But
I feel that way when I talk to grad students, and I'm like, I'm not a grad student anymore.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, okay, so here's my thoughts about STP, and you said that you've tried to do some more things. As it's gotten bigger, I think it's been a little harder to break in. But I think that's kind of normal.
Yeah.
But here's what I'm trying to get to. Whoever's listening to this out there, in STP, you want Brittany Avila. Trust me. No, and I'm serious. I have seen you. I've seen you in person. I know. I get something about you, and the fact that just hold on, because once it cracks open for you, it's gonna be a heck of a ride. Because I think you have so much to offer STP. So
thank you.
Yeah, and in a couple of years, you can tell me I was right. So.
Well, and I know that the floodgates usually work like that. Once you get one, then people start asking you to be on other things, and I'm like, I'm trying to just get to the point where people are asking me, and I have to get a no committee.
Yeah, and I know you're going to have problems with this, but when you're getting involved with STP, and you don't have to take my advice, but when you're getting involved with STP, there are these kind of different areas, right? There's like resources, and there's membership, and there's diversity, and there's programming, and you, of course, want to be involved in all of them. But it is kind of strategic to kind of like mark one or two or three of them, and really aim for those, because you can just you can have a whole lot of impact in one area, and then it becomes like you lead a task force related to something, and then you are working under somebody on one of these committees in this area, and eventually you can kind of, and I'm not talking to you specifically, I'm maybe more talking to kind of anybody who's involved in STP, you kind of move up through your area. And then there's this like natural progression of like being part of committee to leading things to being in leadership, eventually vice president. And it's just for those who find that attractive to kind of like be an STP for a career, it's kind of a cool way to think about the opportunities there. So I'm not sure how you think about it, or if it's strategic for you or not.
A little bit. I've definitely, and that's what I'm trying to do right now, is regather to exactly what are those areas that are most important to me and that I can really make an impact.
Yeah. Well, Brittany, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and before I let you go, is there anything else that you thought we'd talk about that we didn't, or that you're particularly interested in chatting about?
Not necessarily. I would say one of the things that have really helped me throughout everything is kind of accountability. So we've talked a lot about how I have different irons in the fire and different things, and it makes me sound, I think, a little more confident than I feel. And so what I have started doing for my kind of introverted, nervous imposter syndrome is I think I throw things out into the ether, if you will, to be able to hold myself accountable. So, I'm writing this book right now and I'm scared to death to write it. So I've thrown it out. I put it out on Twitter. I talk about it every chance I get, so that if I don't do it, eventually people are going to be like, she never did any of those things she said, and it'll be a little bit embarrassing. So that's kind of one of my tricks that I use, is I try to just throw it out there so somebody knows that I'm thinking of this, and then it forces me to actually overcome that anxiety and nervousness and actually get it done. Because if I hadn't asked Twitter if I should write a book, I probably would have given up by now.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what's your handle at Twitter?
It's my name, Brittany N. Avila.
And is it called a handle for TikTok? What are we talking about here for TikTok?
I don't even know my TikTok handle because I
You
keep changing it.
You don't have to tell me your TikTok handle, but I'm sure you'll put it out on Twitter if it's something that you want to share. Hey, Brittany, I have no doubt that you are going to contribute a ton to student lives and to our little area of STP. And so thanks for also all your support and work with Tip Northwest. We have so enjoyed having you on the West Coast and participating in that way. And so thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.